Good afternoon. This is the Torah on Parshas Bo. This is the third Parshas of Sefer Shmos, and in it, the Jewish nation is really being born. It begins with the eighth of the plagues, which was that of the locust, haba. It then goes on to discuss the ninth plague, which is the plague of darkness. And Pharaoh is still being stubborn. Hashem has strengthened his heart. He still doesn't want to let the people go. And there's going to be a 10th plague after which they'll be let go, which is Malchus Bekoral's death of the first one. This parsha also includes the preparation for the first Pesach, the preparing the Paschal lamb, the lamb that was offered on Pesach by every family. And it talks about the actual miracles of the night of the destruction of the firstborn, and how the Jews in one night went from Sukkot to Ramses Sukkot, which is 120 miles, and they did it instantly. Another miracle where time and space were changed. And it also continues with the story instructions for the future Pesach and Pesachs. Now, what I'd like to focus on tonight is the ninth and 10th plagues, that of darkness and that of the killing of the firstborn. Now, there's, I'd like to talk about what new was introduced during the plagues. Until then, Hashem had operated the world on derech teva, which is meant he controls everything and everything operates under his power. Teva means the world of nature. The world we see outside, there's certain laws of nature, and unless the Shem decides to disturb those, that's the way the world forms and is operated. What he introduced now is derech Nace, the miracles, where natural laws are set aside or changed. We saw that in the last parsha. And normally frogs don't get out of the river and jump onto the land, penetrate buildings, penetrate ovens, penetrate people. Without going through all of them, we also saw that in the last of the plagues, which was Barad, hail. Yes, we've all seen hail, but we don't see hail that's gigantic size. And we certainly didn't have hail that had fire within it. This is something that only Hashem could create, suspending the laws of nature. Now, looking at Teva, even in Teva, we see that the world of Teva, nature, we used to think of things as being substantially solid. Most of the things you see in the world are solid. And if I was making this Torah 100 years ago, 150 years ago, nobody would have questioned that. Now we see, however, that with modern physics and cosmology, the study of the cosmos, that most of what we call solid is not solid. And according to quantum theory, where there is much space between even subatomic elements like electrons and protons, and most of what we think of as solid is really space. And where the specific objects, even in that subatomic world, exist are on probabilities. They can be in many different positions. Summarizing very quickly, the quantum theory, it obviously contains more than that, but it's showing a world that is not solid at all and exists on many different levels. Now, if one looks, that concept is very similar to the deeper meaning of the Torah, the Kabbalah. In fact, there was a book that was written by one of the students at the Vilna Gaon called the Kol HaTor, which means literally the voice of the turtle dove. It's talking about the pre-Messianic era and how concepts of science will be merging or converging with the concepts of Torah and the deeper principles of Torah, what's called the hidden Torah. Now, that is all important. Keep in mind when we're looking at darkness. Now, what was so special about this darkness? It had some very unique qualities. Normally, darkness means the lack of light, so one cannot see, or one cannot see can see very dimly. And if one was in a totally blackout room, one could see nothing. Here we're talking about a different type of darkness. Actually, we're talking about two manifestations of darkness. Now, also, darkness cannot become solid, which it did in the second stage of the plague. And something very interesting, when Moshe and Aaron performed for the first three plagues, Aaron triggered the plagues by hitting the water or the earth. Moshe didn't do that with those because the water and earth sheltered him as a baby. However, the other next five, getting us up to eight, were all done by Moshe raising his staff into the sky. And the question is, why didn't he in the ninth plague raise the staff? Now, as the Orach Chaim Kodesh explains, there's a couple of reasons. Because this wasn't darkness as we understand the concept. It was a different type of darkness. It was a spiritual entity in itself that Hashem created specially for this occasion. And it had miraculous qualities because none of the Egyptians could see anything. It was total blackness. Now, in the second phase of it, the next 3 days, the blackness became solid. When this hit, if a person was in the same position, he or she couldn't get up. And if they were standing, they couldn't move. They were literally frozen into position for 3 days. Now, one of the explanations that the Orach Chaim brings for the plague of darkness is that we're looking at, as I said, the spiritual entity. And that's why he didn't stretch out his staff, Moshe, because when it's something that holy that Hashem is sending himself directly, you show greater respect for it. Now, that's one level. If we go on a deeper level, it's also teaching us something else, that the world of that where is this darkness coming from? It's a spiritual darkness, not the ordinary darkness, which is the absence of light. And according to one of the interpretations, it's coming from Gehenna, which is the next part of the world where evil people are going to go. And it's what is their punishment? One of their punishments is they'll be in darkness, complete darkness, spiritual darkness we can't even conceive of. The Egyptians got a flavor in those 3 days. Now, it also says, as the Orach Chaim explains, that for all the children of Israel, there was light in their dwellings. Now, it's not talking about the houses. There'd be nothing, since the plague didn't, as God said, didn't go in the land of Goshen, where all the Jews were. It did not make sense that it's talking about them. So it's talking about the Egyptian dwellings. Now, on one level, it means it's a miraculous light that, while it was dark for the Egyptians, the Jews could see what was going on, and that's how they were able to explore and know what objects, property the Egyptians were supposed to give them at the time of the Exodus itself. Now, another way of understanding it, that this light on a higher level is part of the life in the next world. And in other words, our dwellings is talking mainly about the spiritual dwellings in the next world, and some of the light was brought in by Hashem here. So it's not a conflict of light versus dark in the ordinary sense. It was one spiritual influence was working on the Egyptians, and another one on for the Jews. Now, looking ahead to the 10th plague, it says, very interesting wording. I'm looking at Parashat Daled, verse 4, in Perek Yud Aleph 11. It says, "Ve'omer Moshe," and he's talking to the Jewish people, "Ama Hashem b'chetzi alayla ani yotzei metok Mitzrayim, and meis kol b'kor Ba'aretz Mitzrayim. Now, very interesting question. It, first of all, doesn't say that God killed anybody. In fact, according to the interpretation of the Or Chaim, he didn't kill anybody whatsoever. And yet it says that the Bechorim will die. So why did God have to go out? First of all, one reason that Or Chaim gives is that we're supposed to that Hashem had such thought of us as so precious and so special. Went out by himself. Now, normally, when Hashem has some evil deed has to be done, he doesn't like to do it directly. He does it through angels. Now, to understand why God had to go then, why didn't he just send the angels? One of the reasons given is that normally when we say firstborn, we mean firstborn of a woman. Here we also meant firstborn of men. And in some of the Egyptian families, somewhere between 5 and 10 firstborn got killed. Now, a woman can only have one firstborn. This was the firstborn of the fathers. And it could be 5 to 10 different fathers, because to put it mildly, in the evil impurity of Egypt, the fidelity to one's husband was quite irrelevant in many cases. And therefore, God went out because only he could tell which children were the firstborn of the fathers. That's something even angels, they weren't given the power to do. So he would point out which ones had to go. Now, that's one thing. And how did these Egyptians die? There's a number of ways of understanding that. It wasn't an ordinary type of death, because as is explained by the Or Chaim, how do evil forces, evil things exist in the world? Is because they have to have an element of Kedusha. I've spoken about this before. They have to have an element of holiness. In other words, even a small amount, because like a vehicle, a car, a toy car, something with out of battery is not going to go very far. In fact, it won't operate at all. So there has to be this spark of Kedusha, of holiness. And what was done is the spark, Hashem took away those sparks of holiness. And when those sparks of holiness went out, the Egyptians effectively died themselves. They just crumbled. Without the physical power there, and that spiritual power, they crumbled. On another level, it's also explaining that the Bechoros, there was a spirit called Bechoros. There was a very evil power of impurity connected to the firstborn of Egypt. And when they were wiped out, this evil was wiped out with it. And that's why the other exiles we've had, as terrible as they were, was not as bad as the Egyptian exile. Now, another understanding of Hetzi, which means like the middle of the night. When you say like, it means you're comparing one thing to the other. So what's being compared here? That the firstborn, that Hashem coming out on the 15th of Nisan, for the firstborn, this was not the first time it was happening. At the time of Abraham, the 4 kingdoms, the most powerful kingdoms of the world, kidnapped Lot after they defeated the other 5 kings, and Abraham went after him. Turns out it was on the night of the 15th of Nisan, when it's Passover, and he miraculously allowed Abraham with 316 men to wipe out 4 armies of the superpowers of the day. Now, that is a second meaning. Now, a third meaning I'd like to briefly explore when it says Kakuzai, it has a different meaning. And this also ties into what I've said now, our sense of time is very ephemeral, because If I say to you, I'm going to speak to you at exactly 6 o'clock at night, 6000, by the time I said it, we moved on to the next time. In fact, the scientists today have managed to divide time up to nanoseconds, which is a trillionth of a second. So while I was just speaking to you for the last 30 seconds, we had 30 trillion nanoseconds. So there is no specific time. So what is what the Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Haver, Talmud of the student of the Vilna, the famous Vilna Magan, Eliyahu of Vilna, explains that Hashem, in fact, the Jewish people also operate above time. In other words, this midnight, this time was not time as we understand it. It operates above normal time and space, as we do, because according to all the normal rules of history and time and space, we shouldn't exist for 2,000 years of exile, yet here we are. We're back here and hopefully getting stronger and stronger all the time till the redemption. So this is another level, and this is one we should particularly take heart from, that even though we see strange events going on today, Hashem on all these different levels is working on our behalf, and we should see the ultimate redemption soon. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.